Vallejo Police Department.
I want to report a double murder.
Yeah, yes, your
Go
name
1 mile
calling.
east on Columbus Parkway, public park. You'll find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye.
December 20th, 1968. A cold Friday night on the outskirts of Benicia, California. A lonely stretch of road called Lake Herman Road winds through dark, empty hills. There are no streetlights, no houses nearby, just silence. Betty Lou Jensen, 16 years old, and David Faraday, 17, parked their car in a gravel turnout near a pumping station. This is their first date. They are supposed to be heading to a Christmas concert at Hogan High School. Nobody knows exactly why they stopped here. Maybe they wanted a quiet place to talk. Maybe they just needed a moment alone. They would never make it to that concert. What happened on that road that night was just the beginning of one of the most terrifying and still unsolved murder cases in American history. At around 11 p.m., a car pulled up alongside David's vehicle. The driver got out. What he did next was methodical and cold. He walked to the passenger side and shot David Faraday once in the head at point-blank range through the window. David died almost instantly, slumping over in the seat. Betty Lou managed to open the door and run. She made it about 28 feet before the killer shot her 5 times in the back. She collapsed on the gravel road and died. When a passing motorist discovered the scene minutes later and called the police, investigators found the 2 teenagers exactly as they had fallen. The weapon was a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Investigators also found a .22 Winchester Western Super X shell casings, a specific brand of ammunition that would come up again. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, no robbery, no sign of sexual assault. The killer had simply appeared, killed 2 teenagers, and vanished into the dark. For months, the case went cold. Local investigators had no leads. The 2 murders seemed random, and without a connection, there was nothing to go on. But this was not random. The man who killed Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday was not done. 6 months and 2 weeks later. It is the early hours of July 4th, 1969. Darlene Farron, 22 years old, and her friend Michael Majot, 19, are parked in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California, just a few miles from where the first murders took place. It is almost midnight. There are a few other cars scattered around the lot. People are celebrating the holiday. Darlene and Michael are talking when, at some point, another car pulls up and parks nearby. Then it leaves. Then, about 10 minutes later, it comes back. A man gets out carrying a powerful flashlight and walks toward their car. Michael assumes it is a police officer. The man shines the light through the window, blinding them, and then, without a word, opens fire. He shoots both of them multiple times with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Darlene is hit several times and will die at the hospital shortly after. Michael is shot in the face, neck, and chest, but somehow he survives. As Michael moans in the car, the shooter walks away. Then, something strange happens. He stops and turns around and fires again. Several more shots into Michael. Then he leaves. Michael Majot, bleeding out in the car, somehow clings to life. He would later become one of the only survivors of this killer, and one of the only people to ever give a description of his face. Michael described his attacker as a white male, roughly 26 to 30 years old, about 5 feet 8 inches tall with short, light brown curly hair. Less than an hour after the shooting, at 12:40 a.m., the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call. A man's voice said, "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to a public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The police traced the call to a public phone booth just blocks from the Vallejo Police Department itself. The killer had used a payphone near the station, almost as if he wanted them to know he was right there, in plain sight, and they still couldn't catch him. This phone call was crucial by saying, "I also killed those kids last year." The caller was linking the Blue Rock Springs shooting directly to the December 1968 murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. For the first time, investigators realized they were dealing with the same person. But who was he, and why was he calling them? They were about to find out. On July 31st, 1969, 3 newspapers simultaneously received letters: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. The letters were nearly identical. They began, "Dear Editor, I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman. and the girl last 4th of July near the golf course in Vallejo. The letters were riddled with misspellings. Christmas instead of Christmas. Identity instead of identity. Whether this was a mistake or deliberate misdirection, nobody knew. To prove he was genuinely the killer, the writer included specific details about the crimes, details that had never been made public. He knew the exact type of ammunition used at Lake Herman Road. He knew how many shots were fired. He knew the position of the bodies. He even knew that Michael Mageau had been shot in the knee. This was not a hoax. Each letter also contained a different piece of a strange coded message, a cipher made of unusual symbols and characters. Together, the 3 pieces formed a 408-symbol cryptogram, now known as the Zipher 08. The writer claimed, "In this cipher is my identity." He demanded the newspapers print the ciphers on the front page of their papers. If they did not, he threatened to, and these are his words, "cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend." The newspapers complied. On August 1st, the San Francisco Chronicle published its 3rd of the cipher. The other papers followed. The public read it, and then, just days later, on August 4th, a 4th letter arrived, this time only to the Examiner, and it opened with a line that would become famous. "This is the Zodiac speaking." With those 5 words, the killer gave himself a name that the world would not forget. In this 2nd letter, he taunted investigators about the cipher, writing, "By the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me." He was wrong about that, but nobody knew that yet. Just 1 week after the ciphers were published, a North Salinas high school teacher named Donald Harden and his wife Betty cracked the Z408 entirely by hand. No computers, no special equipment, just pattern recognition and persistence. They started by looking for repeated symbols. In the English language, certain letters appear more frequently, and double letters are most often the letter L, the word that would most likely appear in a serial killer's message containing double letters. Kill. Using kill as their starting point, they worked outward, substituting symbols for letters until the message revealed itself. It was not the killer's name. It was something far darker. The decoded message read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or atop my collection of slaves for my afterlife." He was not just a killer. In his own mind, he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. The murders were not random acts of rage. They were, to him, a deliberate harvest. September 27th, 1969. A warm Saturday afternoon at Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Pacific Union College students Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, are having a picnic on a small beach by the water. It is a peaceful, ordinary afternoon. At some point, they notice a heavy-set man standing at the top of a hill watching them. He disappears into the trees. Then, about 20 minutes later, he reappears, and he is wearing a costume, a black hood, covering his entire head, with holes cut for the eyes and mouth. On the bib section of the hood, a symbol was stitched or drawn in white, a circle with a cross through it, the crosshair symbol, the Zodiac symbol. He carried a gun and a long knife with a wooden handle, the blade approximately 10 to 12 inches long. The man spoke to them calmly. He told them he was an escaped convict who needed their car and their money to get to Mexico. He forced Cecilia to tie Brian's hands behind his back. Then, when Brian was secured, the man told Cecilia to tie herself up as well. Then the Zodiac put down his gun and picked up the knife. He stabbed Brian Hartnell 6 times in the back. Then he turned to Cecilia Shepard and stabbed her 10 times. 5 wounds in the front, 5 in the back, methodically, deliberately. When it was over, the Zodiac walked to Brian's car and used a felt-tip pen to write on the door. He wrote the dates of his previous attacks and added, September 27th, 69, 6:30 by knife. Then he walked to a public phone and called the Napa County Sheriff's Department. He said, "I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Karmann Ghia. Both victims were found alive. Brian Hartnell survived. Cecilia Shepard, despite emergency surgery, died 2 days later on September 29th from her wounds. Brian Hartnell gave a description of the killer, approximately 5 feet 11 inches tall, heavy-set, with combed, greasy brown hair. Later, like Michael Mageau, he would identify Arthur Lee Allen from a photo lineup as resembling his attacker.
And I asked her to look because she was facing that direction. I was facing toward the water, and I asked her to note, what was going on, and she said, "Oh, there's a man walking around there," and she became concerned about it. And I said, "Well, actually, don't worry about it. There's a lot of people, picnickers, etc. And just, if he kept coming, let me know." And she kind of kept watching. I noticed she wasn't following my conversation. She told me he was stepping behind a tree, and the tree was about 30 feet behind us. And when he came out, she said he's got a mask on, and that was my first inkling that there was anything actually wrong going on.
October 11th, 1969, a Saturday night in San Francisco. Paul Lee Stein, 29 years old, is working as a taxi driver. He is a graduate student at San Francisco State College. He picks up a fare near Union Square. A white male. The passenger asks to be taken to the corner of Washington and Maple Streets, in the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Presidio Heights. Paul drives him there. The cab stops, and then the passenger shoots Paul Stein once in the head with a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. Paul dies in the front seat. But this time, something is different. 3 teenagers in a house on the corner look out the window and see what is happening. They watch as the killer leans over the body, tears off a piece of Paul Stein's shirt, wipes down the inside of the cab, and walks away calmly, heading north into the Presidio Park. The teenagers call the police immediately. Here is where one of the most haunting near misses in the entire case occurs. The police dispatcher, relaying the description, made a critical error. Instead of reporting a white male suspect, the dispatcher mistakenly broadcast that officers should look for a black male. Officers Don Fook and Eric Zelms were patrolling the area. They encountered a heavy-set white man walking near the Presidio, who matched no description they had been given. They briefly spoke to him and let him pass. Later, Officer Fook would come to believe that the man he spoke to that night, the man he let walk away, was the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac had been stopped. He had spoken to police, and he walked free because of a dispatcher's error. At the scene, investigators found a partial fingerprint in blood on the cab door. They also found a piece of Paul Stein's shirt was missing, torn away by the killer as a trophy, or as proof, because 2 days later, the Zodiac used it. Shortly after the Stein murder, the Zodiac called the Oakland Police Department with an unusual demand. He wanted to speak to famous criminal defense lawyers F. Lee Bailey, or Melvin Belly, on live television. On October 22nd, the AM San Francisco show aired a segment with Melvin Belly on the phone, hoping to make contact with the killer. The caller came on the air. He said he was sick. He said he didn't want to go to the gas chamber. He arranged to meet Belly in person. He never showed up. The caller was later identified as a mental patient with no connection to the crimes. But the Zodiac, watching at home, was furious. How do we know? Because he told them. On November 8th, 1969, a new letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. With it, a new cipher, 340 characters of symbols, now known as Z340. In the attached note, the Zodiac confirmed he had spoken to officers after the Stein killing, taunted them again, and wrote, "I have killed 7 people." The Z340 would not be solved for 51 years. Then, in December 2020, 3 civilian codebreakers, David Oranchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl von Eyck, cracked it using advanced software. The FBI confirmed their solution. The decoded message read, "I hope you are having lots of fun and trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner. Because I now have enough slaves to work for me. Where everyone else has plenty of water and nice country. It is nice that wasn't me on the TV show. Will you please hurry after me?" No name, no address, just arrogance, taunting, and confirmation that he had watched the TV show. The name investigators kept coming back to was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher from Vallejo, born in 1933. Before the murders, friends said Allen had talked about wanting to hunt humans, call himself the Zodiac, and shoot couples in lovers' lanes. Investigators found bloody knives, a hooded wetsuit resembling the Lake Berryessa costume, and a Zodiac brand watch bearing the killer's crosshair symbol. Both surviving victims independently identified Allen from photo lineups, but the evidence never conclusively tied him to the crimes. His handwriting didn't match. DNA didn't match. He was never charged. Arthur Lee Allen died on August 26, 1992 of a heart attack, the only suspect ever publicly named by law enforcement. and the case against him remains unproven. Allen was not the only name. Lawrence Kane was identified by multiple witnesses, including a woman who claimed the Zodiac had kidnapped her in 1970. In 2021, a group called the Case Breakers named house painter Gary Francis Post. Law enforcement largely dismissed the claim. Richard Grinnell of the Zodiac Ciphers website notes that 50 to 100 new suspects are named every single year. The Zodiac's confirmed attack period ran less than 1 full year, December 1968 to October 1969. Why did he stop? No one knows. If he was between 25 and 45 at the time of the murders, he would be between 80 and 100 today. Statistically, he is likely dead. But statistically, he should have been caught decades ago. The Zodiac transformed how America thinks about serial killers. He was among the first to weaponize public communication, turning newspapers into a tool of terror.
Capital punishment for myself.
I don't want to give myself up. I want to kill those kids.
He inspired Dirty Harry's villain Scorpio, David Fincher's 2007 film Zodiac, and copycat killers in both New York and Japan. 2 of his 4 ciphers remain unsolved. His DNA has never been matched. The case remains officially open. The Zodiac wrote 20 or more letters. He killed at least 5 people. He was stopped by officers and walked away. He sent a piece of a dead man's shirt as a Christmas card. And then one day, he stopped. The only thing he never told us was his name. And after more than 55 years, we still don't know it.